Ready?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Aisha Refutation, and today I will be refuting the claim that computer games have a positive influence on young adults. I'd first just like to start my argument off by addressing the weakness of the claim itself. We don't really get an idea of what positive is. Positivity is a broad term and it's different for everyone. What exactly is the criteria for a positive influence? Who sets the standards on what is positive? I think this point is vague and adds to the weakness of the overall claim. But before I go into the arguments presented by my opponent, I'd like to address the issue of the evidence provided for this whole argument. There was only one piece of evidence for the whole argument, and that was from Amanda Lenhart from Pew Research. I believe this causes bias for the whole argument in general because we only see one person talking about the subject rather than getting more opinions into the argument. Now I'd like to go into the claims that my opponent made in regards to his major claim. The first argument was that computer games build social skills. His reasoning was that online gaming offers a chance to connect with people across the world and creates a safe environment. I'd like to refute this by saying you can't assume that if you're going to be online on the computer, you'll be interacting with various age groups. It's an assumption rather than a fact. You can never be too sure of whom you will actually be playing with. In addition, you may not be interacting at all because oftentimes computer games don't have webcam, computer games don't have the chat function, so you might not be interacting with anyone at all. A good example is the famous game Pac-Man. You play that, but you're just using the arrow keys. You're not interacting with someone or telling them hi while you play. You're just focused on that game. There is no social interaction. And then he mentions that computer games build social skills and create a safe environment. I would like to say that there is no guarantee that there's going to be a safe environment. You can never know who Baller929 is or Butterfly617 is. That's completely fallacious within itself. You don't know who you're playing with, and that creates actually an unsafe environment. He also reasons that computer games build a sense of community, and what he uses as his basis for this reasoning is MMORPG, massively multiplayer online role-playing games, which create a so-called sense of unity. This reasoning does not seem sufficient enough to make this argument. No substantial information of what kind of unity this specific role-playing game has created was presented. All that was presented was personal experience. So this caused for a sweeping generalization. The overall claim that he made about building social skills was a hasty generalization. How can we be sure that playing these role-playing games will, in essence, create unity at all for everyone? Unity, again, is such a broad term within itself, and unity to everyone is completely different. Fact of the matter is that by playing these games, you're not building any social skills whatsoever. Evidence from New York Times, Kiefer, 9 out of 10 children play video games, and many of them play for hours a day. On average, children play video games 2 hours a day, with 64% of all American children playing at least 1 hour a day. Obviously, they're on the computer for a long time, not really building so-called social skills. With that being said, a study was done from New York Times on a blog that followed 3,000 students in the 3rd, 4th, and 7th grade in Singapore. Children who were more impulsive and less comfortable with other children spent more time playing video games, the study had found. 2 years later, these heavy gamers, who played an average of 31 hours a week compared with 19 hours a week for other students, were more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, and social phobias. They were also more likely to see their grades in school drop and have worse relationships with their parents. You're not building any social skills if you're having worsening relationships with your own parents. And then Dr. Zenitov, the psychology professor at Iowa State University, said young people who are more impulsive, more socially inept, and less empathetic to begin with are more likely to become excessive video game players. Then once they become what he terms pathological gamers, their grades are more likely to drop and their relationships with their parents suffered. My opponent's second argument was that computer games challenge people to think critically and outside the box. His reasoning was that one must come up with a plan of attack and able to win video games. But I have an argument for that. Not every video game requires you to have a plan of attack. If any of you guys have played Bubble Shooter on abcarcade.com, all it is a column of colorful bubbles, and all you do is sit there trying to match color to color. Not thinking of a plan of attack. It's a simple matching color game. You're not really using your mind or challenging yourself to think critically at all. And he also mentioned that not all games are rinse and repeat mindlessness. So my opponent recognizes that there are games that do not require much thinking. This defeats his whole claim. He said that video games require thinking, but then he goes and says that not all games are rinse and mindless. So he notices that there are games that are pointless. Online games offer the opportunity to compete with other people. My opponent also makes this reasoning. But this is an assumption that by competing with other people, one is challenging themselves to think critically. What about competing in sports, doing basketball? That's another way of becoming social. With that being said, I would say that the claim computer games have a positive influence on young adults does not have sufficient evidence and therefore is not legitimate. Thank you.
Right, structurally, it's easy to follow. I like the idea at the beginning of challenging the question concerning what constitutes a positive benefit and how are we supposed to measure that. One of the first things that, in addition to asking the question would be to ask, well, what standard did the advocate provide? And if they don't provide a standard, then I think that's an argument to make and say, look, they have to provide us with a standard, and the standard that's going on here is that they're going to be better socialized, they're going to think outside of the box, and whatever the third one was that they mentioned. All right, so those are the standards that the advocate says that we have to meet. If they don't meet those standards, then it certainly doesn't have any positive benefit. And in fact, there are reasons to believe that it goes the opposite direction, and I'm going to show you those kinds of things too. So I think what you need to do is kind of turn the argument on its head and try and point out that the advocate failed to meet their own standard. There's a good, clear statement on the first sign point, and you challenge the assumption right away. It did seem like your primary argument here was that there's only a single piece of evidence, and it's biased because it's only a single piece of evidence. That's not really where the sense of bias comes from. I think the problem with bias is that somebody's searching for information regardless of what the data says. They're looking to confirm an opinion to begin with. I think that would suggest some bias, and you didn't show that that particular source was biased in that sense. I do think that you've got a legitimate criticism, though, that there's very limited evidence provided by the advocate for this particular point, and that in essence it'll be easy to contrast your position to their position based on the frequency with which my point of view has been researched, with the confidence with which my experts are willing to cite and authorize their position, and the clarity of the examples that I'm giving in contrast to this vague thing. Oh, they think outside of the box. Well, no, they crawl inside a box and hide it, and they don't want their parents bothering them when they're in the box. I think that that's a good way of looking at it. I thought the way you expressed the ideas was very effective. I don't know enough about all these games because I don't play them, but I can visualize exactly what people playing these MMORPG games is like. I doubt very much that they are complementing each other and creating a community online of gamers. My guess is that when they succeed in their ventures, the comments that they post and the web videos that they discuss and so on and so forth aren't the kinds of things that you would say that's a community-based kind of relationship. It's more like in-your-face ass bite, die, you gravy-sucking pig, that kind of stuff. And it's probably not that hard to find some examples of that sort of interaction on the website. So anything like that, I think, would probably go a long way to supporting your position. I like the data that you had that talked about how many kids a day are playing video games, how much time they're spending on it, and the ones that have particular problems, their problems get worse when they play the video games. I thought that responded to that point pretty well. And I thought that your analysis about the strategy and thinking and all those kinds of things, I think it's a good challenge. But you kind of are in the same situation the advocate was. They've got some examples of games that might require that kind of thinking. You've got some examples of games that don't require that kind of thinking. What neither of you is doing is